You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. At the start of the 20th century, German merchants were significant in Venezuela, managing much of the country's import and export business, as well as acting like unofficial bankers. However, these merchants did not have much influence back home in Germany. Instead, it was the big German industrial and banking names, those involved in railway projects, who had the real connections and influence back in Germany. The end of the 1890s was a challenging time in Venezuela, full of revolutionary chaos that heavily impacted these German interests, prompting them to plead with Berlin for assistance. Things became particularly difficult during Venezuela's civil war in 1892, which brought Joaquín Crespo to power and resulted in 6 months of chaos with no real government in charge, and then again in 1898 with more turmoil in the form of forced loans and seizure of properties. Despite Venezuela being less of a focus for German investment compared to countries like Argentina or Brazil, the investment it did have was significant. The Krupp Company's Great Venezuela Railway venture was one of Germany's most expensive investments in South America, worth 60 million marks. Even though Venezuela agreed to better terms for the railway project in 1896, they started to miss payments by 1897 and completely stopped by August 1901. Adding to the tension, Cipriano Castro, who was one of the military strongmen to grab the presidency, stopped paying off foreign debts after taking over Caracas in October 1899. This move mirrored similar actions that left Britain also seeking redress for the nearly $15 million Venezuela had borrowed back in 1881 and then failed to pay back. In a push for peace, Germany suggested to Venezuela in July 1901 that they should resolve their disputes through international arbitration at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. However, between February and June 1902, Venezuela ignored 17 notes from the British representative concerning their grievances. Castro believed the United States would intervene to prevent European military action, relying on the Monroe Doctrine. However, President Theodore Roosevelt had a different interpretation of the doctrine, seeing it as not applicable to European interventions in principle. As vice president in July 1901, Roosevelt had made it clear he supported allowing European countries to discipline South American nations if necessary, and he reiterated this sentiment to Congress on December 3, 1901. The story of how Anglo-German collaboration on Venezuela came to be is still debated. In mid-1901, after the distraction of the Boxer Rebellion, Chancellor Bernhard von Bülow of Germany decided to take military measures in response to issues in Venezuela. He considered a blockade after discussing it with the Navy, a move supported by Admiral Otto von Diedericks, who also suggested taking Caracas if necessary. However, there was some internal disagreement in the German government about whether the blockade should allow neutral ships to pass or seize them, leading to delays. Kaiser Wilhelm II was also not fully sold on the idea of military action. Despite this, Germany made a statement with naval force by sending warships SMS Vineta and Falk to the Venezuelan coast in late 1901. In January 1902, the German Kaiser delayed the blockade plans due to a civil war in Venezuela, hoping for a government that might be easier to deal with. Matters were complicated by rumors in the U.S. and England about Germany's interest in Margarita Island for a naval base. But after a reconnaissance mission deemed it unsuitable, this plan was abandoned due to its vulnerability. The British Foreign Office, worried about protecting British citizens' interests compared to Germany's proactive stance, started discussions with Germany about joint action, initially receiving a refusal. By early 1902, British and German financiers pushed their governments towards action, with Italy also wanting to join. Berlin initially refused Italy's involvement but agreed after Italy offered benefits in Somalia. Italy then dispatched military ships towards Venezuela. In June 1902, Venezuelan President Castro's seizure of a British ship, the Queen, and his lack of diplomatic engagement pushed Britain towards action, even considering proceeding without German cooperation. However, by July 1902, with German citizens and property also suffering due to the Venezuelan civil conflict, Germany revisited the idea of joining forces with Britain. Come mid-August, an agreement was reached between Britain and Germany to implement a blockade. Then, following an incident involving a German ship hijacked by Haitian rebels, Germany took decisive action, leading to both U.S. and British interventions that, despite pushing the boundaries of the Monroe Doctrine, did not elicit significant concern from the United States. In November, during a meeting between Kaiser Wilhelm and King Edward VII, an agreement was reached to seize Venezuelan gunboats, highlighting fears of U.S. retaliation and ensuring that Venezuela could not settle with just one of the involved powers. The British press criticized the agreement, fearing it would drag Britain into unwarranted conflicts led by Germany. Throughout this period, the U.S. was informed of the intentions to intervene in Venezuela, specifying no objections as long as no territorial acquisitions were made. On the 7th of December 1902, both London and Berlin presented ultimatums to Venezuela. Eventually, Germany agreed to Britain's preference for a war blockade. After Venezuela ignored the ultimatums, an unofficial naval blockade commenced on the 9th of December with major German warships. Italy followed with its own ultimatum on the 11th of December, which Venezuela also rejected, maintaining its stance that its national laws were sovereign and non-negotiable regarding foreign debts. The German naval force, which consisted of 4 ships compared to the British's 8, took their cues from the British in terms of operations. On the 11th of December, 1902, the German ship Gazelle took over the old gunboat Restaurador at the port of Guanta. The Restaurador was anchored and then commissioned under the command of German Captain Lieutenant Titus Turk with Gazelle's crew, and after significant repairs, it was handed back to Venezuela in far better shape on the 23rd of February, 1903. The British naval group was led by Commodore Robert A.J. Montgomery and included ships like the HMS Alert and HMS Charybdis. An Italian naval force joined the blockade on the 16th of December. The blockade was highly effective, capturing 4 Venezuelan warships with minimal resistance. Virtually all Venezuelan naval assets were seized within 2 days. When 2 Venezuelan ships were found to be unfit for the journey to Curaçao, the Germans simply sank them. Meanwhile, on land, Venezuelan President Castro arrested over 200 British and German citizens, leading to a military response to evacuate these foreign nationals. The U.S. Ambassador Herbert W. Bowen successfully negotiated their release. Tensions escalated on the 13th of December when a British merchant ship was seized, leading to British demands for an apology. With the apology not forthcoming, the British, with German help, bombarded Venezuelan forts. This military action came as Washington called for arbitration at the behest of Castro, a proposal neither the British nor Germans were keen on, especially since it initially did not cover all claims. However, facing the prospect of arbitration, the British suggested a compromise and agreed to it in principle as a strategic move. Despite communication issues and delays, the official blockade notice was published by the British on the 20th of December, while the German blockade was fully in place a few days later. American public opinion started to turn against the blockade, influenced in part by the presence of Admiral George Dewey's U.S. fleet nearby. The U.S. sent an envoy to assess Venezuela's defenses, confident in its ability to defend against a German attack. A British government publication, later revealed to be about the solid agreement between Britain and Germany, caused outrage. This was captured in a critical poem by Rudyard Kipling in the Times, highlighting the controversial partnership between Britain and Germany. By the 17th of December, Britain informally agreed to arbitration, a stance soon echoed by Germany. The adherence to the Monroe Doctrine made any territorial claims on Venezuela problematic, and the negative media coverage, especially in Britain and the U.S., added to the pressure. Germany, valuing its relationship with both Britain and the U.S., reluctantly agreed to arbitration, primarily out of solidarity with Britain. 14 years after advocating for the United States to join the World War against Germany, during his 1916 presidential campaign, Theodore Roosevelt made a bold claim. He insisted that Germany had only agreed to arbitration in Venezuela because he had threatened to attack German ships with Dewey's fleet. This assertion has sparked a century of debate among historians. George Herring, a historian in 2011, pointed out, "No evidence has ever been discovered of a presidential ultimatum. Recent research concludes, on the contrary, that although the Germans behaved with their usual heavy-handedness, in general they followed Britain's lead. The British, wanting to maintain good relations with the United States, went out of their way to avoid conflict. Both nations accepted arbitration to resolve their issues and keep on good terms with the United States." However, historian Shaw Livermore views it differently, noting that the Secretary of State's comments were almost as direct a threat as diplomacy allows. Roosevelt also claimed that Germany had plans to take over a Venezuelan harbor and establish a military base. It is true that the German representative in Venezuela harbored such ambitions, yet historical documents indicate the German Kaiser was not interested in such a project, with the real reason for Germany's actions being an insult to German prestige by Castro. The Kaiser agreed to intervene only after confirming Britain would lead the effort. In January 1903, tensions rose as the German ship SMS Panther tried to enter Maracaibo's lagoon, a key area for German business. On the 17th, it skirmished with Fort San Carlos but had to retreat due to the shallow waters. The Venezuelans saw this as a victory. Reacting to this, the Germans sent another ship, the Vinita, armed with heavier weapons, and on the 21st it bombarded the fort, causing destruction and killing 25 civilians. This aggressive move wasn't approved by the British commander, who had been instructed not to take such action without consulting London, a message that didn't reach the German commander. This incident upset many in the United States, and the Germans argued that the Venezuelans had shot first, a point the British agreed with, but still labeled the bombardment as unfortunate and inopportune. According to the German Foreign Office, the Panther's foray was aimed at ensuring a tighter blockade by blocking supplies from the Colombian border. Following these events, Roosevelt warned the German ambassador that Admiral Dewey was ready to move to Venezuela from Puerto Rico within an hour if needed. On February 13th, after choosing to resolve their disputes through arbitration in Washington, Britain, Germany, and Italy came to an agreement with Venezuela, culminating in what is known as the Washington Protocols. Herbert W. Bowen, serving as the U.S. ambassador to Caracas at the time, represented Venezuela in the negotiations. Venezuela was in a tight financial spot, owing a massive debt that included $120 million in principal and $46 million in interest, plus an additional $186 million claimed for war-related damages, against an annual income of just $30 million. This agreement was a big break for Venezuela, cutting down the claimed amount by $150 million and setting up a payment plan that considered the country's financial capability. Venezuela committed to allocating 30% of its customs revenue from its two main ports, La Guaira and Puerto Cabello, to paying back the creditor nations. Each of these nations received an initial payment of $27,500, amounting to about $932,600 today, with Germany set to receive an additional $340,000, or roughly $11,529,800 nowadays, within 3 months. The embargo was finally lifted on February 19, 1903. The deal included a provision for mixed commissions to handle any claims against Venezuela, which generally functioned well and helped settle the dispute amicably. However, the matter didn't end there, as the blockading nations demanded preferential treatment for their claims, something Venezuela wasn't willing to agree to. This led to 10 countries, including the U.S., signing agreements on May 7, 1903, to take their grievances to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. On February 22, 1904, the court decided that the blockading countries did indeed deserve preferential treatment in getting their claims paid. Washington wasn't happy with this ruling, worrying that it might encourage future European interventions. This situation played a big part in shaping the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, articulated by Roosevelt in a message to Congress in 1904. This principle stated that the U.S. could intervene in the economic affairs of smaller Caribbean and Central American countries to ensure their international debts were paid and to prevent European intervention for the same purpose. The Venezuela crisis, especially the arbitration outcome, significantly influenced this policy change. In 1906, President Castro of Venezuela took drastic measures against international companies that had supported a revolution, straining relationships to the point where the U.S. and then France cut off diplomatic ties over disagreements related to debts. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.